This is part 2 of building a blog with Rails 5 and Bootstrap 4. In the previous episode, we set up the basic functionality that we need for our blog. So back in our browser, with our server running, we can go to localhost 3000. We see a list of posts. I added some, and I grabbed some content from this site, hipsum.co, which is hipster ipsum. So you can generate some funny content for your post while you're working. We can create a new post by clicking New Post. We can look at existing posts by clicking Show. So if you look on the left, I have title, first, second, third, fourth. And if I click Show, I can look at that post. If I click Edit, I can change it. If I click Destroy, I can delete it. This episode is going to focus on the layout and design of the blog itself and getting us ready to move into some more advanced stuff. Okay, so let's jump in. So if we jump back over to the code, I'm going to open up a file. If I look in App, Views, Layouts, you can open up this application.html.erb. I also sometimes use this, if you're in Sublime Text, you can hit Command T on Mac and just search for the file name like this. But anyway, we have it open now. So the first thing I want to do is put a div with a class name container. This is another handy Sublime Text trick. If you type the tag you want and then dot class name and hit tab, it will just make it for you. So what this is going to do is it's going to edge in our content a little bit if I refresh. So the container is a responsive utility. As you drag in, the container resizes itself so that it keeps your content in there. I also want to add a ERB tag here and put in a variable called controller name and another one called action name. And if I save that and go back over to Chrome and refresh, I'm going to open up the developer tools and we're going to look in here and we have class container posts index. So what's happening, the controller name is the name of the controller that was used to render the view, and this is the action that we were on. So for instance, for our particular situation, we have posts, which is our index on the post controller. If we click on one and do show, we're going to get to post show. So if I look back over here in the body container, post show, it's pretty straightforward. Those classes will be useful for some styling purposes later. For now, we're going to move on. Let me close my developer tools and jump back over to the code. So the next thing that we're going to do is put a navbar in. So in my layouts file, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it _navbar.html.erb. And I'm just going to paste in some stuff, and I'm going to scroll down slowly so that you can pause it and copy this. I'm going to do the same thing with a style sheet that I put together for this. First off, I'm going to delete this scaffold styles. We don't want that. And we don't need this post styles either right now. So we should only have this application.scss. I'm going to create another one, new file. We're going to call it _navbar.scss. I'm just going to paste in a set of styles and do the same thing I did before. Okay, so save that. And the last thing that we're going to do is go back to our application.html.erb. Just inside the body tag, we're going to render this navbar. And we actually need to specify that it's in the layouts folder. So when you call render, it starts looking inside the views, and it will look in whatever folder you specify here, and then whatever file you specify here. If we were to put this, for instance, inside the post folder, and then we were looking at something using the post controller, say our blog post index page, or looking at a particular blog post, it would actually, if you just put navbar, it would look inside posts. But since we're going to have the navbar on multiple controllers, I put it in layouts, and we need to specify that that's where you start looking. Also, I forgot one thing. In application SDSS, I need to import our navbar, and we should be good to go. Now, if you look back at the navbar, there's some things that we haven't defined yet, and these are going to throw some errors. So I'm going to show you a method called basically follow the errors. So let's jump back over to the browser and just see what happens. So I'm going to take out this and go to the root path, hit enter, and we're going to get an error. Undefined local variable or method about path. So what this is telling us is that we don't have a route defined. So I'm going to go back to my routes folder. I'm going to close down some stuff. We're going to look in the routes, and I'm going to add get about. Let me actually show you what that means. So if we look in the navbar, we have this about path here, which I'm defining. So when someone visits our website /about, we want to show them the about page. That's basically all we're talking about here. So if I go back to my routes and I say get about, and I want to point that at a controller that we're going to call the pages controller, and we're going to say about, and then to get that variable about path working, that was the problem, we're going to say as about. So if I go back and refresh, undefined local variable or method contact path, so we can do the exact same thing. So get contact, so I'm just going to command click on all these and change it to contact. Save it, refresh, and now we get it. Now, it's not throwing any errors anymore, and you see we have this nice looking navbar up here. If I click on about, it's going to throw an error. It's going to tell me uninitialized constant pages controller. So whenever we visit this path or the route, it pointed at the pages controller, which doesn't exist, so we need to add that. So we're going to go into controllers, new file. We're going to call it pages plural controller.rb. Say class pages controller, and we need to inherit from application controller, and save that. Don't do anything else, just save it. If we refresh, now it's going to tell us the action about could not be found, so we want to go back. Just call it about, don't put anything in there. Refresh, now it's going to say missing template. So the template is referring to the views, so we need to create a folder here called pages, and we need to create a template or a view called about.html.erb. All those names have to match, so the about action matches the name of the view that we're creating. If we just save that and refresh, we shouldn't get any errors. There's nothing there, but we don't get any errors. So I'm just going to put a h1 tag and just type about page. There you go. Then we need to do the exact same thing for the contact. So let me actually click contact and we'll just work through this. Action contact cannot be found, so we're going to do def contact, and I'm going to skip a step now that we all know how it works. New file, contact.html.erb, and then h1 contact page. So I am not going to be designing these pages in this course or this series of episodes. That's not really what this is about, but I wanted to show you how to get some basic pages set up, and then you can kind of go in and build them out yourself. The next thing that is not working is whenever we visit a page, these should be showing which one is active. So if we look back in the navbar, make sure I save that. Yeah, okay. So in the navbar, we have these yield blog active, yield about active, contact active, and so on and so forth. So what we're trying to do is from the view, like we did previously with the page title, we're going to provide a variable and tell it that this should be active. So that'll be more clear once we do it. So let's look at posts index. So previously we did this provide page title and then gave it some content. So we're going to provide blog active, and we're just going to say active. So what this is going to do is it's going to put the word active wherever we yield blog active. So in our navbar, we're going to get class navlink active whenever our page tells us that it's active. So if we're on these different pages, we're going to send the word active in. So I need to do this as well on posts show, posts new, and posts edit. And let's see what happens. So you can see that the blog is darkened here. If I click show, it will also be. If I click edit, it's also. And if I go to post/new, it's still active. All right, so let's quickly do the same thing for about and contact. So this one needs to be about active, and contact needs to be contact active. Now if I click on these, it stays darkened as we click on them, so that's great. So now it's time to start sorting out how our blog should look. So let's jump back over to the code, and let's open up posts index. And to start, I am just going to literally delete all of this stuff. So the first thing that I'm going to do is add a div with a class row, not row. And in our controller, we talked a little bit about this in the last episode, but in our controller on the index, we have an instance variable called posts. So what I'm going to do is just say at posts.each do post So what this is going to do is going to go through each of our posts in order, whatever order we've provided, and it's going to yield each post to whatever code we put here in the middle. So all I'm going to do right now is just say post.title so that you can see that it's working. So we just have each title. There's no formatting or anything. It's just printed out in order. The next thing that we're going to do is, instead of this, we're actually going to render post. Now to get this working, let's just do our follow the errors technique. If we go back over here and we refresh, it's going to tell us we have a missing template, and it tells you right here how this should work. It says missing partial posts underscore post. So this is a handy little Rails utility. If you name everything properly inside of your post folder, you can just create something called post underscore post rather .html.erb. Now in this file we will still have access to post with no @ or anything, just the variable. And that's a behavior that is part of Rails when you render the post this way. So let's try this. And we get the exact same thing. Now, I wanted to show you this way, but there's actually, if you have this really simple setup like this, in Rails you can actually just do render posts, and that will work just the same. So back in our post file, I'm going to paste in some code and I'm going to talk you through it. So the first thing, at the very top, we're defining a class column small 6 LG4. So what this is saying is Bootstrap has this column grid structure where on different screen sizes you have different numbers of columns. So if you have something that they consider large, we're saying make this 4 columns out of 12. There's 12 columns in their grid, so 1/3 of the screen, or the container rather, should be this. And on small and medium screens, we're going to say 6, and then everything below small, which is just XS, which is mobile, will be 12. After that, and that will become more clear in a second. I'll show you exactly what that means in the browser in a minute. After that, we're making use of the new card class in Bootstrap 4. I've created my own custom thing here called a card topper and given it a background image. This may look a little weird to have an inline style, but you'll see why I'm doing that in a minute. Then we have this card block with the link to the post title, a publish date, which right now is just hard-coded, and we truncate the post description to 130, and then we link to a button, read. This is another custom class that I wrote, button read, and let's go get those styles and paste those so that you can have those. Okay, so in our style sheets folder, we're going to create a file called _posts.scss, and before I forget again, I'm going to go ahead and require that here, or import it rather. Now I'm going to paste some stuff that I wrote for the posts. So if you remember right, we had those classes that we added to our container. So we have the controller name and action name. So this applies to everything on the post index page. We have these card styles. I'm just going to scroll down so you can copy all of this. We have some stuff down at the bottom relating to some responsive stuff, so media queries. Trying to think if there's anything extremely special that I need to tell you about in here. This really isn't a CSS class. Anyway, you can copy those down and look at them on your own. Let's jump back to the browser and see where we're at. So if I refresh this, okay, let's see what's going on. It looks like it's not picking up the styles that I wrote, so let me save this and make sure that it's saved. Start there. Okay, that's what it was. Alright, so this isn't quite beautiful yet, but it's a start. But let me show you some of the stuff that we talked about. So as you can see, we have 3 columns right now. 1, 2, 3. If we start going down in size, you'll see, so this is extra large. This is large, so we're still at 3 columns. We said that when we get to medium, we should have 2 columns equally, or there would be 6 columns wide. And once we get down to small, it should still be 2. And when we get all the way down to mobile, we're looking at just 1 column. So what's actually happening is Bootstrap has 12 columns. It's a grid with 12 columns, and you specify the number that you want your actual column on the screen to take up. So right now this first column is taking up 4 Bootstrap columns. When we get down to this size, our first column is actually taking up 6 of the 12. And we get down to this side, we're taking up 12 out of 12 columns to make our one column of content. All right, so let's jump back over to the code. I'm going to go ahead and also fix the show page for the post. So just like we did before, just going to axe everything that we have here, paste in a few things. I don't need those top things, that's not necessary. So basically what I've done here, I've got a row, I've got on medium-sized screens, we should be taking up 10 columns. We have an offset, so out of the 12, we're taking up 10, and we want to bump it over 1 so that we're in the middle. Then when we get to large screens, we're going to be at 8 columns and bump it over 2 so it's in the middle. And then we're going to center all the text. So this isn't going to be the fanciest thing ever, but it's going to make this look kind of decent. So over here, if we click read, now we get our first post kind of nicely centered. If I start going down, you'll see that it resizes. And when I get down one more, it should bump out to be 10. So it doesn't really look like it changes, and that's because we changed the column structure. If I get all the way down smaller, it's going to bump out to 12, but you don't really notice because it's just basically following the width of what's available. All right, a few things I want to wrap up so that we can actually finish this episode. So the first thing is these things should be sorted from most recent down. So I created these in first, second, third, fourth order, but we would like them to read back to us fourth, third, second, first. So let's jump back to the code. Let's close all this stuff. And I'm going to open up post, which is the model. I'm going to define what's called a scope, which is something that we can call on the model itself it's basically a database query. So I'm going to call it most recent. And I'm going to just say order ID descending. So what this is going to do is take the items that we want, and it's going to give them back to us in descending order from the IDs. And the IDs are generated incrementally in the database. So this will give us basically what was most recent. So then back in our post controller, instead of saying post.all, I'm going to say post.most recent. In a future episode, we're going to make this to work off a published date, but we're not there yet. So let's just see what this does. And it reverses it just like we said. The next thing I'm going to do is fix these images. So I'm going to go back to my terminal, and I'm going to run the following command. It's going to be Rails G migration, which is what we're going to do when we want to add database columns or change the database in some way. And I'm going to say add banner image URL to posts. So the only really part of this that's important is the last word matching the name of the database table, which is posts with an S, plural. And then we're going to say banner image URL colon, and then the data type we want, which is string. So that generated our migration, and then we can say Rails DB migrate. And that adds you can see right here, it's add column to the post table. It's called banner image URL, and it's string. Okay, now we need to jump back into our post controller. I'm already there. In our post params, we're going to allow for banner image URL. So that means that we can submit them through the form. And then in our post form, I'm going to add a new field. I'm just going to put it right under title. We're going to make these forms look a lot better later, but for the moment we're just going to add this here. It's going to be a little ugly, but that's okay. Then if I click this and then I add edit, we should have our banner image URL here. There's a really cool site called Pexels, if you've never heard of it, that does free stock photography. That's kind of cool. So let's get we'll just get the image address, and I'm going to paste that in here. I'm going to do this for each one of my posts. I have third as one, edit. Let's get another picture, a sea turtle. Need to do the second. Helicopter, that's cool. And finally the first one. Oh, that's called first, not one. And I just need some other random picture, so we'll just grab that one. Okay, so if we go back to this, it's going to look exactly the same. So let's jump over to our code. And then in underscore post, we had this background image URL, and we're going to change this to be post.banner image URL. And that looks right. The last thing I'm going to worry with in this episode is this published date here. Like I said earlier, we're going to add more fully featured publishing concepts later. But for now, I don't want all of those to be the same. So I'm just going to add a method here on the post model, publish date. And for now, each item in the database has a timestamp for created at and updated at. So I'm going to add created at .strf time, which is stringified time or something like that, or string from time maybe, I don't know. And we're going to do percent. Let's see, I think it's percent dash D. Let's see, percent dash B maybe. Percent dash D, and then percent Y. Let's see what that looks like. I think that's similar to what I'm thinking. And then we're going to say published. Actually, let's just do this. Let's do percent equals post dot published string. Actually, let's do display published day. Sorry, I'm trying to get this method name right. Display day published. There we go. I think that reads the best. So we'll save that, and then we need to rename our method. Oop, not that. Display day published. And then we're going to say, need to put this in there like that. That's called string interpolation, where you put a variable inside of a string. And then we're going to say published. Let's see what this looks like. I may have done that wrong, but let's see. Nope, that's right. Cool. So they're all published on the same day in our situation because I created them all at the same time. We want to add that same thing here. So let's go to the actual post. So I'm just going to say at post dot, what did I call that again? Display day published. Not sure if that's the best method name. It reads kind of like an action, something you're telling it to do, kind of like that. So we'll just say that, and then that reads pretty well. Okay. Cool. Well, I think that's good for this lesson. And we'll pick pick it back up in the next lesson and start working on things like making the form look better, adding some authentication so that not everyone can create blog posts and that sort of thing. Until then, I'll talk to you next time.